Go.
Hi, welcome to Awake Radio. This is David Schurter, and I am the host of davidschurter.com, where I hope to help survivors and victims of abuse get a venue and a voice to let people know what's going on. This is my first recorded live show, and so I'm just getting this started. I apologize for any of the issues that we may have. We've already had a few technical difficulties. That was my fault. I'm just learning this, so thank you for joining. This is Awake Radio. I want to give a shout out to Ed Operman, who gave me this opportunity. You can check out Ed at Operman Report, and you can also check out Operman Report and Ed on Facebook. And Awake Radio is kind of a new thing for a lot of us. There are several shows that I want to mention. William Ramsey has a show called Occult Investigations, where he investigates the West Memphis 3, the Johnny Depp connection, and I find it very interesting because the Johnny Depp connection is directly connected to a man by Hunter S. Thompson, who was directly involved with things that were going on in Omaha, Nebraska, and Franklin. Now, before I go any further, I do want to let people know right away, my guest today is Michael Brownell. And he is an amazing individual in that he was there sitting right beside Sean Bonner when he was murdered. And he's never been able to have his voice heard. We've talked a few times in the last few days, and he's never gotten a chance to actually tell anybody what happened. Sean Bonner was Troy Bonner's brother. And Troy Bonner, for some of you who know, was instrumental in the Franklin credit thing that went down in Omaha, Nebraska. And now I say that he was involved with Franklin credit, but he really wasn't. He was involved with Alicia Owen. Alicia Owen was a minor who was claiming that she was pregnant with Chief of Police at the time, Robert Wadman's baby. And Troy Bonner and a man named Paul Bonacci got together with Alicia Owen, and basically it was Paul Bonacci's testimony to the grand jury that got everything in Omaha called a carefully crafted hoax. But before we get to Michael, let me mention just one more show on Awake Radio. Fiona Barnett, she's an Australian down under. She has a show, Pedophiles Down Under, where she is bringing forth information on the cover-ups with the Wood Commission, and she's an amazing woman. And so check out her show. And before we get in today's show, I just want to mention a few things. There are some of you out there who know who I am. You know that I'm heavily involved with the Jacob Wetterling case, and I do not believe, in fact, I'm positive that what is being said right now about his abductor being found in the body is all a lie, and it's not real. And so before I start this, I have a blog entry that I put out there, and I just want to read it to people so that you might be able to hear. If you don't get a chance to read it, you'll be able to hear it. It's called The Official Facts Being Presented in the Jacob Wetterling Abduction Cold Case. Fact: Jacob Wetterling was abducted October 22nd, 1989 at 9 p.m. in Minnesota, at night on a deserted road that had no streetlights. We are now being told that Jacob's abductor had pantyhose over his face, but we have detailed abductor pics that were distributed directly after the abduction, and there is absolutely no way that this could be possible considering the circumstances. Fact: the abductor pics being presented now are not the ones that were being presented by the police in '89. They are different, and comparing the abductor, Danny Henrich, to the abductor pic, we are now being led to believe that in 28 years, this man has not aged. He looks just like the abductor pic they are presenting, which is different from the other 4 that came out immediately after the abduction. And we can't forget that he was 27 at the time. Fact. The DNA, the body, the confession from the imprisoned felon, everything that has come out has come from our government and our media. 2 weeks after my interview on the John B. Wells show, Caravan to Midnight, where I detailed out the problems with this case, it was solved with body and abductor and everything. A case they couldn't break in the past 28 years, which suddenly gets, I don't even know what to call it, which seems but it seems like quite the coincidence, considering the timing, especially when you hear exactly what I said on the John B. Wells show. Fact. Not only has the official story changed several times, like when first reported they claimed Jacob Wetterling's mother identified him, and now they are claiming forensic work has been done to determine the body, which no one has seen, and we barely know where they found it. And now they're saying it's Jacob because they've proven it through DNA. This masked abductor, with pantyhose on his head, in complete darkness, has now been reported to be in several cars. And in fact, the last story they just released that I saw on WCCO at the writing of this blog entry, their local news TV station is saying now that he actually walked Jacob down the road on foot. Fact. They now claim they have lost all the 911 calls. I just don't have anything to say to this, especially when you consider everything else. You would have to be a complete moron to believe what they are saying. Fact. My dad, Robert Lynn Schurter Jr., abducted Jacob. My family was involved with the government-run child trafficking ring, so if they investigate him and my family, it is going to lead to Omaha and all the stuff that was going on there in the 80s, as the Franklin Credit Union was the very least of what was going on. And considering both our presidential candidates are directly linked to convicted pedophile billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, his private plane deemed the Lolita Express, and his private pedophile island where it is known without a doubt that children are, being raped there. In fact, both Donald Trump and Bill Clinton have been named the most in Epstein's little black book. There is an obvious reason they wouldn't want any of this truth coming out in an election year. Now, I bring this forward. I think it's important to mention because tonight's show with Michael, we are going to talk about the death of Sean Bonner. Now, what's interesting about the death of Sean Bonner is that many, many people know what happened to Sean. They know that Troy Bonner's brother was murdered. But you can't find any real facts about any of it anywhere. There's a lot of conjecture on a lot of websites about it, but there's no real facts. And Sean Bonner is just another example of how they murder people and then twist and use the story for their own ends. And it's generally meant to quiet people and keep the truth from coming out. And so with that, I am going to introduce Michael and welcome you to the show, my friend. I am honored that you are on my first ever recorded show.
Well, thank you, David. I appreciate you having me, especially, with this timing. It's been 25 years, and until recently, I believed it to be an accident. I hadn't followed much of what happened later. I was actually fed some misinformation that Troy just overdosed, and later found out that he was found in a New Mexico hospital where he had gone in and told them that the Franklin people were trying to kill him, and he was put on a suicide watch, which we all know a suicide watch means that's a 24-hour watch. He was found sitting up, his mouth open, and blood coming from his mouth. And that just doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen.
Well,
and I know that they've been trying to protect me.
Michael, with Troy Bonner's death, they basically have tried to make it out to be a drug overdose. But the question for me is, if he was overdosing on drugs, how exactly and why exactly did he get left in a room for hours by himself? Someone's overdosing on drugs. Don't they have nurses and doctors around them?
Of course,
and
of course they do. Of course they do. They even have precautionary setups, initial testing, all the way down to the fact that he would have been stripped down and put in a gown. And anybody who's been to an emergency room knows that they have very strict guidelines. And some of the first things that they do is assess. It's triage. It's basic triage. You assess that patient.
Anybody who has stayed in the hospital for any amount of time realizes you can't get any sleep because they never leave you alone. You fall asleep and 15 minutes later, they're taking your blood pressure and your vitals.
Yeah.
And so now,
of course, now if you hit the button, you're going to be waiting a while. But no, if they have doctor's orders, and especially when you're on a watch like that, because of course, when somebody enters an emergency room and they're claiming, people are after me, they're going to kill me, that is going to trigger any physician, any nurse, that either this person is on drugs or unbalanced.
But either way, they're not going to leave that person alone.
No, they would not. They would not. And again, I was fed misinformation that he just overdosed, and end of story. And that's just not true. And
well, let's get into I know that people are more than interested in hearing what you have to say, and so you were Sean Bonner's best friend. And that was Troy Bonner's brother. And Troy Bonner was obviously involved in Franklin. And you were there the night that Sean lost his life. And so could you first start by explaining how you knew and got involved with the Bonners? And then could you just, as much detail as you possibly could you just explain what happened that night?
I am finally glad to. I met Sean and his younger brother first. They had just moved into base housing. What I want the listeners to realize is this occurred in military housing, Capehart, in Omaha, Nebraska, where the military has full jurisdiction. His mother married an Air Force, I want to say, officer, but I don't believe he was an officer. He was enlisted. And that was their new stepfather. And I was visiting some girlfriends across the street, and they said, you got to meet this guy. They're just really cool. And I could hear the music coming from their room upstairs, and they were kind of upset about being relocated from Council Bluffs to military housing. It was kind of a huge change, whereas I had been a military brat since I was 10 years old. So, moving around was something I was accustomed to. But upon meeting them, I walked into the room, and there was a drum set where his younger brother was playing the drums, or Sean was playing the drums, sorry, and Brandy was playing guitar. And it just so happened I had done some vocals and also played keyboard. So we started off talking about music and just really immediately hit it off. And it went from them introducing me to him, very quickly, just a friendship started between Sean and I. And we dated, some of the same girls. He even dated one of my girlfriends that was very close to me, and still remains close to me.
Well, you people have to remember that you were not 19, 20, and
yeah,
so
I was only 20. I was 20 years old, and I was living in housing with my family, and I had moved out previously, but they graciously allowed me to come back when, as many kids our age, ended up going home after our first time out. We fail. So I was back at home working and driving delivery for Pizza Hut there in Council Bluffs. And him being from Council Bluffs, he still had a lot of friends there also. So that only strengthened the bond. And when you meet people as a military brat, you tend to learn to make friends quickly. And you have to be a little bit more outgoing, which any military brat can tell you. When you move to a new place, you've just lost all the friends that you had previously, and now you're in a new place, a new school, a new environment. And since we were older, Sean was, I believe, 19. He was kind of stir crazy. He was a bit stir crazy, and there were other reasons that he was on edge. I kind of became close with the family. I can't say his mom ever really loved me, but I know that Troy really was a great guy at heart. But Sean was pretty troubled over what Troy was going through, and it was sort of a family hush-hush thing at the time.
Michael,
yes.
I'm gonna just interject there because people are gonna wonder.
Okay.
Troy Bonner was what was considered at the time in Omaha, Nebraska, a bear boy. A bear boy is someone. It was always a good-looking young man working for Alan Baer, who was having sex with Alan Baer and going and finding other young kids to also have sex with Alan Baer. And when you brought him, now I was a bear boy for 2 weeks. I was not in it long enough to even know. I didn't know anybody at the time to bring to Alan Baer, and my mother put a kibosh to that immediately. But I knew Troy Bonner. We were both bear boys, and people who will look back at my stuff will realize Troy and I were not friends. We got along like oil and water, and so we didn't get along. So it's really nice to have you here, Michael. You can give a different perspective other than the harsh one that I seem to have when it comes to Bonner or Troy.
Well, of course, Troy was a little odd, but with what he had been through, I think anybody would come off a little odd. Don't you? This is, something that, when I came into it, of course, it wasn't the first thing that we talked about as friends, but as we became closer friends, and he spent more time, and I spent time with Troy. My first impression was, well, wow, Troy's a real wacko. I was thinking it to myself, But then again, Sean, the connection that we had as friends, it was very clear that if nothing else, the family knew
what had
been going on. And
Troy did not have a chance. He was in the MK Ultra just like I was. He was raped and abused at the youngest of ages like I was. The difference between Troy and I was that I was able to get out of it and Troy never could. And so
he did try. Not for lack of trying. God, the kid tried. I have to say that, there were many occasions when Sean would show up, at our house there in Cape Art Housing, which coincidentally is where Sean lost his life.
In your house.
I rode around with Troy. I met friends of theirs from Council Bluffs. And there were times when Troy would just disappear. And I'd ask Sean, hey, but, where's Troy, or what's going on? And Sean was often distraught by what his brother was going through. And he was also told, Sean confided in me a lot of things. And it seemed just too crazy to be true. Just too crazy. At 20 years old, my experiences, of course, I thought I knew everything. Who doesn't at 20?
Exactly.
I thought I know everything. I thought, I was arrogant. I was a womanizing jerk. Like I said, Sean and I shared several girlfriends, not shared them at the same time. What I mean by that is when I had already broken up with them, of course, then it was Sean, and subsequently, that was okay with me because at the time, like I said, I was arrogant and I had already moved on. Sean looked up to me. And that's one of the hard things about this is Sean did. He looked up to me because I would have several girls that would come over to the house, to talk to me, to see me. I didn't just commit to one. I wasn't just dating one. I dated.
A pretty typical 20-year-old male. I'm sorry, but isn't that a pretty typical? I mean.
I guess now, I look back and I think, yeah, sure, that's that's okay, but David, I've been living up until just recently with the only way I could let go of this was that I blamed myself for not being a better friend, for not being in better control, and as I explain, you'll understand where my shame and where blaming myself starts. Now,
Michael, before we go into that,
okay.
Why don't we just get it out of the way? Why don't you go through a detailed explanation, or as detailed as you possibly can, about the night that Sean Bonner lost his life in your house, or in your parents' house. It wasn't yours. It was in your parents' house.
Yes.
Can you just go through and explain what was going on? What was everyone like?
Okay.
Just give us a clear image of what that night was like and what happened.
You bet. Okay. One of the key points of this evening that I want people to understand is that my dad was not there when a young man named Kip King arrived. Kip King was there to show my dad, allegedly, his new 38 Special that he had purchased. Kip was already in trouble with my mom for leaving a gym bag with an Uzi, which a family member who was very, very young picked up one morning while he was asleep, and my mom came walking out of the kitchen and caught him with it. And it was loaded with a banana clip. So I had been brought up. I want everyone to know that I had been brought up that there is no such thing as an unloaded gun, and there isn't. I'm sorry, there is no such thing as an unloaded gun. Sean did not have that same upbringing. Sean was afraid of guns. Sean knew little about guns. And that's what makes this even more horrific, is that night, present with me were two people, also his girlfriend, who he had asked to go home. Sean had asked to go home. My mom had gone to bed. Another sibling had gone to bed. And we were in the front room watching breaking news that Operation Desert Storm, Desert Shield, had begun. And for a military brat, that's pretty important. We knew that planes had been taking off from Offutt all day, more so than usual. So that kind of gave us the answer to those questions. We were trying to figure that out on the news. And, of course, mainly glued to the television, but President Jolene Hedinger and Kip King. Kip was there to show my dad supposedly a 38 snub nose he had just bought. Previously, we had Kip run to the store. Since we weren't legal to buy alcohol, we asked him to go ahead and go, and he took my younger brother along. He fired 3 shots into a stop sign as we sat and waited for him. And when he got back, we were pretty angry because my younger brother was only 14 at the time. We asked him specifically to, since my dad wasn't there, which is also very auspicious and suspicious, because my dad's commander had told him that he needed to coordinate with the Red Cross. His dad had had a heart attack, and he was flown out that morning. When arriving in California, his dad met him at the airport also. He had not had a heart attack yet.
And your father was the only one who would have been in the house who understood guns, correct? Yes,
other than me. Of course, my mom, she understood them also. And my younger brother, he had been hunting. But a pistol is a whole another, especially a revolver, and 128 grain jacketed hollow point packs a hell of a punch.
Isn't it safe to say, though?
That is not your standard round that someone would just carry for anything other than, say, police use, or maybe, I believe the term was wad cutters. They have a special jacketing that swirls. And they're designed to break up and blow apart.
It would be safe to say, though, if your dad had been there, chances are no one would have been playing with any guns, let alone waving them around.
No, not at all. Not at all. And as Kip waved the gun around after he showed up with the tequila, we were irritated with him, of course, first, because Kip was kind of odd. We knew Kip, but nobody really knew Kip. So, him showing up the way he did, of course, we thought was a great circumstance because, well, hey, we got somebody who can buy for us. And of course, waiting for Mom to go to bed, to break out the bottle. But after taking a drink of Montezuma, any listeners out there will know the difference between Cuervo and Montezuma. Sean immediately did what in comedy they call a spit take. He spit it out because he couldn't it tasted like turpentine. And I took a shot, and that was it. It got put away. And that can all be corroborated that we took breathalyzers and there were blood alcohol tests on Sean, but we weren't drunk. Kip had nothing to drink, and neither did Hettinger. Jolene, she didn't drink. At the time, I had never actually seen her drink. I had drank with her sister, but back on track. So we're there, and that's a bust. We're not going to be doing any drinking. Kip is still playing with the .38 as he sits in the chair. There are two chairs, a couch in the middle, separating the dining room from the front room, and an area in between the chair that Kip is sitting and the couch for us to travel through the dining room into the kitchen. And that's the way the base housing there is set up. So I went ahead and put some top ramen on after telling Kip put the gun away. I hear Jolene make some squealing noises and go, oh my God. And I come out and tell her, I'm like, keep it down, what are you? And Kip is pointing the gun different directions of the house, just dry firing it. And he has a spent round. That is a round that he had fired already that evening into a stop sign, one of three. That left three live rounds.
So when he was doing that gun, it was empty. There were no live bullets.
Well, that would exactly. I mean, you can't really say empty, but the bullet was not live. No, the bullet, the actual lead, the powder, the primer, they were gone.
Yeah, they had already been spent.
Those are the things that activate a bullet. Okay, and he was just putting on a show, I believed, for Jolene. Thought Jolene, here's a guy like Kip, he never gets any attention from girls. Jolene's giving him some attention. At the same time, Jolene is still there only by the fact that she had dated Sean, they had broke up, and Barb is gone, and she was, I'm sorry, I slipped there with another name, but I didn't mean to do that.
Don't worry. I mean,
it's okay. Okay, there's a million of them in the world too. The point is that that she might have thought that maybe if Sean had a few drinks, I can only imagine that that's what she thought, and that's why she was sticking around. Well, I had asked
Michael.
I had asked him to leave. I had asked Kip to leave. I asked Kip flat out to leave. I told him and said, "Hey man, it's just time to go. It's getting late." I put ramen on, some top ramen on. Like I said, the water to boil. Went back to check on it. Sean was glued to the television. He was also kind of watching what was going on with Kip, and calling him an idiot, different things like that, and we made him very unwelcome, as we were trying to make Jolene unwelcome. Sean and I were just sort of bummed. We weren't going to be doing any drinking. It was just going to be another boring night in Cape Art housing, which we had many of. Just many nights. This was like any other night. This is January 10th, 1991. And
so
Kip continued. Kip put the gun away. I went back into the kitchen. I was stirring the top ramen. I had added it. And again, this I know that it's taking longer to explain, David. I apologize for that. It has been 25 years, but I'm trying to recall every detail.
It's no worries, and I don't mean to interrupt. I know that people, I know that people are really interested.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get down to brass tacks. Once I had gone in and put the ramen in to sit after the water had finally boiled, I was standing behind Sean at the couch, waiting the appropriate 3 minutes for top ramen to kind of soak up and the noodles to soften before I added the spice packet. That to us was gourmet cooking. And I walk back out, and again, Kip's got the gun out. I hear Jolene again. And please forgive my language. I am a Christian. I'm trying to be the best Christian I can be.
Just remember, we're on the air.
I had told her in no uncertain terms to please shut up, you stupid bee. You're going to wake up my mom. And if you wake her up, none of you are going to really like what happens next. Now just knock it off. Sean had turned the television up a little bit. I went back in, added the seasoning packet, stirred it up, poured my half into a bowl, since the other half was for Sean, walked through, and sat down on the couch. Sean was on the middle cushion. I was on the far left cushion, in between him and Kip. Jolene started to make noise again as I was telling Sean, hey man, because I wasn't about to offer food to either of them. I just kind of wanted to let them know, hey, it's really time to go, guys. Again, totally ignored, and I do have a very loud voice, but I was trying to keep it down because, again, my mom's sleeping and a sibling's sleeping in the room next to the front room. And I sat down, and Sean said, wow, man, it looks like we're actually going to invade over there. And I said, no. And Kip spins the gun, the barrel of the revolver, sorry, not the barrel, but where the bullets are held. He spins it again and dry fires it at his head. And I remember, as I was telling Jolene, as she's going, oh, stop it, I can't believe you're just freaking crazy. And Kip, we thought, was just eating up the attention. But Sean reached across me and grabbed the gun out of Kip's hand that was just kind of hanging in his hand over the chair and said, you stupid bee, it's not even pop. And the gun went off.
The gun that was previously completely empty.
Yes. Yes.
And had been clicked enough times with him playing that you all figured it was empty because it had never gone off.
It never had. We even saw on the table next to Kip, a coffee table where a lamp sat and a doily, where there had been the other bullets.
And you talked about the bullet previously, but I just kind of want to reiterate that the gun that wasn't loaded at all had a special kind of bullet added magically to it. Can you explain that bullet? And
yes.
I mean, you just did, I know, but I kind of want to reiterate it.
Okay, yeah, it's a 128 grain hollow point. Now, I don't know for sure if that's standard issue for a 38 or not. I just know that that's a lot of power behind a very little lead. It's a lot of powder in there for a little bit of lead. A hollow point is designed to leave a little hole and a big hole on the other side. It breaks apart on impact. Sean was pointing the gun directly at his temple, level with me. Now, I'm 6'7". Sean was not near as tall as me. But by all rights, that bullet should have hit me in the neck.
And that's why you and I have talked about it. And
Yeah.
I think that bullet, where you guys were sitting, and they obviously knew that Sean was talking to you at the time. You were best friends.
Yes.
And I'd
been with Troy several times. Several times I had been with Troy. Not that you could consider Troy and I friends, more acquaintances, and his mom, like I said, his family. I don't even really want to mention their names because their family has suffered enough loss.
And I do want to point out, in talking to Michael in the last few days, Michael actually tripped me out pretty hard because this is not the first death that fits these exact circumstances. In fact, the death that I speak about in my book with David Klotz that happened in '86 mirrors almost exactly what happened with Sean. Someone was playing with a gun. It was never supposed to be loaded. And then magically, all of a sudden, it was loaded and someone died.
And if Sean would not have taken the gun from Troy, or I'm sorry, from Kip, if he had not taken the gun from Kip, there is a possibility that he would have then pointed it over because we were giving him such a hard time and dry fired what he would then tell police. He was dry firing with a witness, another witness there. They were just playing around. He was playing around with the gun and it accidentally discharged.
Now, when you say that Sean grabbed the gun, Sean didn't have the gun. He just changed the direction. But Kip had his finger on the trigger, and Kip is the one who pulled the trigger. Is that correct?
No, not as I remember it, but that very well could be. You have to understand that after it happened, I was covered in blood. I thought I was shot. I thought that I looked at Kip and then I looked at Jolene. And neither one were looking at me. They were looking at Sean. And as I turned to look at Sean, he had a look of shock on his face. And I believe he was taking it from Kip to show Jolene why she needed to shut up, and was trying to prove that, hey, it's not even loaded at all.
And it hadn't been loaded until that point.
No, it hadn't. And I can't be sure because immediately shock set in.
Well, I mean, you're going to have, obviously, Michael, no one expected something like that. Your best friend getting shot right in front of you in that circumstance, that would be trauma enough for every one of us would be traumatized by that. And it would be hard to, after that, but after Sean was dead, and this is on military base housing, you actually went to the Bonners and sat with the Bonner family, did you not?
Yeah, once I was done, and it was kind of strange. Kip and Jolene immediately went to St. Joseph's Mental Hospital, where they were admitted and put under observation. The police could not talk to them. The newspapers could not talk to them. No one could talk to them. And I believe they probably even discouraged family from talking to them. But I was taken by a Sarpy County sheriff and not a military officer, police officer, a security police officer, since we were technically on military property. This is a military matter. But I was taken to the Sarpy County Courthouse, where I spent hours under interrogation and polygraphed. As they were, I believe they were doing a autopsy on Sean. The bullet that should have gone straight through went through the top of his head. And for years now, I have blamed myself for not being a better friend because it was my home, because the people there should have been under my control, and I should have just done something. If I would have done something different, maybe it wouldn't have happened. But I now know I don't think now that it could have gone away. I don't think I could have made it go away. I may have made it go away for that day, but with the information that I've been provided recently, calling me an assassin.
And you didn't even have a hold of the gun in any. I mean, there's no way for you to hold the gun.
My prints weren't. No, my prints were never on the gun.
And yet they interrogate you, and the very person and the girl that he's with that were involved, that brought the gun, were shooting the gun, were the only people who could have loaded the gun. They didn't get any interrogation at all. Nothing happened to them. They got sent to the hospital, and they all focused on you.
That's right. That's correct. And once I left the interrogation, and it was being ruled an accident, which people die from unloaded guns every year. But I still felt so responsible. And up until a few days ago, I could have swore I was responsible. I had prayed and prayed for forgiveness, and I had finally come to a place where I could live with that until reading that I was an assassin, and also viewing a video that was supposed to be released on the Discovery Channel and was never released.
And for that video, it's called Conspiracy of Silence. It was a documentary, a documentary that was all about Omaha, Nebraska, and some of the stuff that was going on, even though it didn't even begin to scratch the surface of what was really happening. Conspiracy of Silence was done by a British documentarist who came into Omaha, did the documentary. It was supposed to be aired on the Discovery Channel. But the day that it was supposed to be aired, the Republican Party paid the Discovery Channel $500,000, and it got yanked. It actually did play once on the East Coast, but it got yanked every place else. And the only reason, from what I understand, the only reason is because John DeCamp got a copy of it. But I'm not at all a fan of John DeCamp, so I'm not going to, I can't speculate. But it's out there. So if anybody wants to go to YouTube.
It is now out there. It is now out there. There is a link to it, I believe, through your site. And watching Troy's testimonies and knowing that he recanted first and then worked with the FBI to try to shut up Alicia, which is all in the Conspiracy of Silence documentary that you can view, your listeners can view for themselves.
And on that note, Michael, I want to bring up a good point because I want people to be aware. You were in Omaha just like I was. You knew the Bonners. You hung out. You weren't involved with a lot of the stuff like I was. But I have contended from the very beginning that Paul Bonacci was not part of the Omaha scene. I had never seen him at any of the parties. I never saw him with Alan Baer. I never saw him ever. The first time I ever laid eyes on him was when Alicia Owen, Troy Bonner, and Paul Bonacci were on the news. And it was the first time I ever saw Bonacci. Now, you were in Omaha. Omaha was very small.
I never met him through. I met Danny King. I met. I was actually, I met several of Troy's friends. After Sean's death, Troy and I continued to have a relationship. He never, at first I know that they blamed me. Of course they should hold me responsible. I felt responsible.
Michael,
in ways I still feel responsible.
You have no reason to feel responsible. You were not involved. You didn't bring the gun. It was only that you were there. What you're feeling is survivor guilt. That your best friend was shot and killed in front of you, and it's survivor guilt that why couldn't it have been you? It happened to your house. But you did not bring the gun in. You tried to make the people who had the gun leave repeatedly. Now, this whole situation of, Kip just happens to show up when your dad is sent out of town to go see his father on a wild goose chase, and Troy Bonner, the reason why this is such an important issue is because everyone knows that Troy Bonner's brother was murdered to shut Troy up. And it didn't work. And then they ended up killing Troy as well.
And he never mentioned that to me before Troy disappeared. Now, here's the thing. Troy disappeared roughly, I want to say maybe May of that year. That was the last time that I saw Troy. I'd even attended a wedding where Danny King was. He was also one of the Baer boys. And they tried to keep it down, but I could always overhear things. When I would be hanging out with Sean and Troy would be talking to friends and things about these situations, you overhear things. But you don't really put all the puzzle pieces together at 20 years old when you're an arrogant jerk like I was.
You don't even have to be an arrogant jerk. 20 years old, you don't know. I didn't know anything. At 20, I had no clue what I know. Now I'm almost 50. So don't feel bad. No 20-year-old that I've ever met knows anything, really.
But I came to terms with this by, of course, taking it to Jesus Christ and turning it over to him. And I thought I had found that peace that I needed, the peace that I had been craving the whole time, the peace that my family, that even his family tried to give me. At the funeral, his mom came to me and told me that she just hoped I could get some help. When my mom came running in after my younger brother was first, he came in and he thought I was shot. So he ran yelling back towards my mom's bedroom as she met him halfway in our hallway. And as she turned the corner, she told my brother to go back in the back room, and she was on the phone dialing 911. As I picked the phone up, Sean is slumped over in my lap. And I played with his hair. And I just kind of tried to hold things together because I didn't want to believe he was dead. And that kind of thing happens. And you never forget. To this day, post-traumatic stress disorder is something I deal with. The 4th of July is not my favorite time, and I am very patriotic. My family has to come, and they warn me ahead of time before they even do any shooting where we live. Before they fire guns, they let me know ahead of time. Because if I hear a pop behind me or near me, and I don't know, even a firecracker is set off, and someone who just thinks they're going to scare me maybe, I'm back with Sean in my lap. And the smell of gunpowder, and the ringing in my ears. And I wanted justice for him. I wanted justice for him. I told his mom Kip should be charged for some sort of negligence, at the very least, some sort of negligence. Kip disappeared. He disappeared. Literally disappeared. No one saw him after that. We tried to find him. We went through mutual friends, tried to figure out where he was at. And so he's still in St. Joe's, where he wasn't in St. Joe's as a patient. We knew that we couldn't find him. We thought maybe his parents, just because they had a little bit of money, may have sent him off somewhere to get away from the whole thing. But the point is, the investigation was closed so fast. It was as fast as this happened.
There was never.
It was closed so quickly. It was ruled an accident. The Omaha World Herald printed a story. Immediately, before the obituary even came out, the story pops, which is probably commonplace, but the story comes out, Omaha man dies in game with gun. So the newspapers are reporting that he's playing Russian roulette. They name Jolene, myself, and Kip King.
Michael,
I can't find the story.
Michael, let me point out, the Omaha World Herald was owned and run by Harold Anderson, who was instrumental in what was going on in Franklin. And so when you hear these, the Omaha World Herald was instrumental in covering up all of this stuff. Any news that went out in Omaha.
I've been trying myself to find out who wrote that article, since one of the columnists was later in the Franklin scandal, Peter Citron, was later charged with pedophilia. And I'm looking for that article because I wanted to know, was that article actually written by him? He was a different type of columnist, yes. But did he write this article? And the fact that the owner, I know I don't trust the media even one bit after this happened, and in years since. I've watched our media be turned into a puppet show to manipulate. I see the same stories just twisted in different directions by political party, which is, of course, the best way to label and control us is why don't we just separate them into groups, and then we can kind of herd them like cattle whichever direction we want.
Well, Michael, like I said at the very beginning, as I talked about Jacob Wetterling is not an anomaly. He doesn't stand alone. He's just typical. It's exactly what they do every time. They give us these BS stories that don't make any sense, that don't have any facts, that don't have anything, and they just expect everyone to believe them because it comes from them, and yet they're the very people who are actually creating the problems often.
But yet people like you who present facts are always under fire. And that's kind of the problem, but that's one of the reasons why I was so glad. And I knew in my heart, I felt something pulling me when I first received those links from a family member. And they were completely blown away. They opened my eyes to so much. Those poor kids, those men used them, bought them like caviar and champagne with money and power. They think they can do anything they want, and they got away with They got away with the entire thing that happened. Again, your listeners are going to have to watch. I just urge them to watch Conspiracy of Silence. Even though it's not the full produced version, there are enough facts in that. And I know that you're not a fan of the...
I'm not a fan of Troy, but that there is no denying that he wasn't involved. He was heavily involved. He was a bear boy just like I had been a bear boy. And he
yes, and I recently found out that this happened in January 10th. Troy had recanted. Alicia Owen was up for perjury. Troy, after working with the FBI to try to discourage others that had come forward, this happened, and in the video he states that his brother was murdered, and that's why he had recanted again the story and went back to the original story to back up Alicia.
The issue with Troy Bonner that I had, knowing him personally, was that he was a pathological liar. If he told you that it was sunny outside, chances are you needed to grab your umbrella. And it wasn't that he was a bad person. He was just a young kid, and he was caught up in this mess in such a way that it was impossible for him to escape.
Yeah, and he was still, like I said, he was still a kid when this happened to him too. If we can say that at 20 and at 19, Sean and I were still kids, then we can clearly say that Troy, for the better part of this, while you also were just a kid, you were young.
That's why the Franklin was actually able to keep quiet, because what was happening is that they were using kids as pawns. We were all pawns, and we were all involved in stuff we had no idea about. It's just like what you've been saying. Sean, it was an accident, and you've been taking so much guilt over that accident that you could have done more. But now in the last few days, and I know that it's been in the last few days because I've been talking to you, and
yes,
I want people to know that I did not reach out to Michael. In fact, it was just the other way around. And Michael,
I reached out to you.
And I didn't answer Michael right away because I get a lot of people who play a lot of games. And so I just figured, because of where I'm at right now. But then last Saturday, actually, Michael started PMing me on Facebook, and we started talking, and we got into a conversation. I told him, here's my phone number. Just call me. I need to talk to you. And
as we talked and as things unfolded, I started to change my perspective a bit on the timeline. Now, Troy, like you said, he did have a problem with lying. Of course, I thought he was exaggerating, but the family never expressed to me. They never expressed to me, never once did they express to me that they thought I had murdered him. But when you put in the Franklin credit scandal, immediately you get 2,000 hits. 271 possible victims. At least 100 adult victims have come forward now.
The 271 victims that came forward came out, and they were compiled by Gary Caradori. He was the investigator that was involved in Franklin. He was trying to investigate it. And the day that he died, he was in Chicago. He called his office saying that he had found all of the pictures. He had pictures, video, everything that would have blown us out of the water. And so on his flying back from Chicago to Omaha with his son AJ, who was, I believe, 9 years old. Maybe he was 11. It was either 9 or 11. But his son's name was AJ. They were flying back because he was bringing the information back. His plane exploded in air. Now, people say, oh, that's an accident. That was an accident. Well, yeah, until you consider whose jurisdiction the plane landed in. Because at the time when his plane went down, Robert Wadman was no longer working in Omaha, Nebraska. He was in Illinois. It was his jurisdiction that Gary Caradori's plane crashed at. So what do you think the chances are? He's flying home from Chicago, and his plane just happens to crash in the same jurisdiction in a different state that one of the men he's investigating is chief of police in. I mean, that's quite a coincidence.
Oh, and even more of a coincidence is that he was meeting with Rusty, the photographer for King.
That's Rusty Nelson.
Who was using I'm sorry, it was Larry King, not Kip King, and not Danny King. Now, as far as the relationship between Danny King and Kip King, I don't know. I guess I would assume that King is like Smith or Jones. There's a lot of them out there, that it is kind of coincidental that Kip King, Danny King.
Michael, we know
that Danny is no relation to Larry, but I don't know if Kip is any relation.
Well, Michael, let me point out, because we were talking the other day, and I told you that my brother, Stephen, was actually the second photographer that Rusty Nelson speaks about.
Yes.
My brother was the one who was doing a lot of the pornography and was really focused on the snuff films. That Rusty Nelson said there was a second photographer involved. That was my brother, Stephen. My brother, Stephen, actually, if you Google Frank Church of the Church Committee, who brought up the MK Ultra in the Senate, if you look at his picture, his official picture, my brother Stephen took that picture. And so my brother Stephen was out in Ocean City, Maryland. He dies. And I'm talking to my niece after he's dead, and I said, yeah, he was homeless. He didn't have anything. And my niece said, you would be surprised at what he had. Well, that kind of spurred my attention, so I kept abreast in that area just to see what I could find. 2 years later, a man in Ocean City, Maryland, gets busted with just a huge amount of child pornography that is satanic ritual abuse child pornography. Some of the worst stuff you can possibly get. In Ocean City, Maryland. The man's name? Larry King. Not the same Larry King that was in Franklin Credit. But what are the chances that my brother is involved with yet another Larry King Jr.? And so I wonder if the name is even real.
That could very well be. I will definitely do further investigation on that. Well, David, like I said, I thank you for letting me tell my side of the story. I just can't thank you enough for also opening my eyes to this evidence that is just so clear. I mean, we're talking about kids from Boys Town, of all places, and Larry King taking them and putting them on airplanes, flying them to D.C., where they call the Golden Boys, which are 10 years old or younger. They use them not just for sex, but abuse them sexually. And the kind of abuse that isn't even considered, wouldn't even be considered S&M. It is purely evil. I am still trying to wrap my head around everything that happened back then and what I'm finding out now. I am just not speechless, but I'm in constant prayer
Well,
just
Michael,
God lead me the direction He wants me to go.
I think that God is answering our prayers because I think we all have the same prayer. And I think that it is very fitting that my first recorded show is on 9/11, because I was thinking about it this morning when I was thinking, wow, it's so interesting that my show is being presented at 9/11. And then I started to think about it, and I thought,
It's also
but
known
instead
now
of
as
having
Patriot.
instead of having 747s, but instead of having 747s, I have a bomber loaded with nuclear weapons, and I'm headed straight for their ivory towers. And that's why I want people like you and all the other people in Omaha to come forward and start telling your stories, because it is about time. We're talking 30-something years. It is about time we all get heard, that someone actually hears what we have to say about the situation, instead of just feeding into this official BS story that doesn't have any semblance of the truth. Because I'm sorry, I just listened to you emotional. There is no way you killed Sean Bonner and have the emotion in your voice the way you do. There's no way. Absolutely not. So why are there reports on the internet calling you an assassin? You know, this is all being done intentionally.
I think because there's a lack of information about Kip. I think that because there's the headline game with gun, because of the similarity in the way that happened. You were telling me about your friend
David
over in Council Bluffs. Yeah, David. And I had heard about David. That was one of the reasons that Sean was afraid of guns. It was because Troy, that was one of the reasons Troy recanted in the first place. This is...
And let me state that so that everyone can get that. Troy recanted after all the stuff with Alicia Owen. He recanted because David Klotz was murdered. David Klotz, people listen to me and they hear this story about David Klotz. And so they think that like David Klotz and I lived in a little bubble and it was just me and David Klotz. Nobody else was involved, whatever. David Klotz was one of the most magnanimous people I'd ever known. Everybody loved him. He was well loved in Omaha, Nebraska. His murder was what quieted everything down. The very week that David was murdered, he was murdered. Mark Anderson and Walt Carlson went to jail for pedophilia, and Larry King got brought up on charges. And it was that week that for the charges that he was brought up on just embezzling money.
Embezzling money. Of course, the rest of it, Alicia Owen goes to jail for perjury.
And stands today as Nebraska's inmate who has spent the longest time in solitary confinement. She went to jail for how many years? For perjury by saying that she was pregnant with Robert Wadman's baby as a minor. No tests were ever done.
Longer than King did for accusing her, for the accusations. 8 counts. And
so we wonder what happens
King
to the
whistleblowers. Does less time?
Say that again, Michael.
Oh, I was just saying, and King himself does less time. This sends to less time than Alicia. And Alicia comes forward. And Bonacci, Paul Bonacci, of course, perjury, but then he wins a civil suit for $1 million against King? Okay.
You don't even want to get me started. Sense. You don't even want to get me started about Paul Bonacci because he
okay,
is
well,
let me tell you.
I just wanted to mention that of course, they say Paul Bonacci will never see the money because King is broke, but I want your listeners to know that Larry King, who allegedly masterminded hundreds and hundreds of these parties with drugs and pedophiles who took them straight from Boys Town, who used kids like you and directed the whole thing, is now living in Washington, D.C. And he is working with children again.
He's involved with 2 child's charities.
I cannot believe that even with the accusations made, they would let him anywhere near a child. It's disgusting. If you have the power and the money, and you no longer buying clothing, I guess, and cars and private jets to fly around and see the world, well, what comes next, I guess? And I just want your listeners to also know that it's my personal belief that the Satanism involved in this is, in my opinion, again, unrefutable. This is the enemy turning innocent children into now probably those who haven't come forward, who haven't admitted what happened, who can't come forward. This is for you kids out there, or you adults out there, or any kids out there that are being abused. Don't let this scare you or intimidate you into not coming forward. It is not okay. It is not all right. And keeping it inside will do you no good. You need to come forward. More people need to come forward. They're not going to touch this. They're not going to do anything about these cases. They're going to remain closed.
The nice thing about it, Michael, is that people, right before, you had just contacted me probably, a week ago? I think it was a little...
Yeah, approximately a week.
Yeah, and so I also had someone else hook up with, or contact me, and they were trying to say, I've read your book, I've gone onto your blog, I think you and my mom have a lot in common. And so, of course, I just blew it off because I was thinking, I'm not going to get involved with a conversation with someone talking about their mom. It just didn't interest me. And so, like you, he was talking. He brought up a few things. And so I gave him my number and decided, okay, give me a call. He started talking, and he said his mother's name, which I'm not going to say. But he said his mother's name, and he was all shocked. When he said his mother's name, and I said, the school teacher? And he was just like, well, yeah, she was a school teacher. What come to find out, his mom was actually one of my heroes. And the reason why she's one of my heroes is because in Omaha, Nebraska, nobody spoke about her except in whispers. Because you never wanted anybody to hear you talking about her because you were afraid that what happened to her would happen to you. And so you didn't want anyone to know you were talking about her. So they were all hush-hush whispers. This woman had no idea who she was or what was going on. Much like you, Michael, you go through this whole thing with Sean Bonner, and you don't understand what you just went through and what just happened because you only know your own part of it.
Exactly. That's exactly my own perspective. And when you step outside that...
That's why I think that this venue, this radio show, is really heaven-inspired because it's allowing me to bring a lot of people from Omaha to get together, and we can start sharing notes because I find we start sharing notes. We all have a different piece of the puzzle that when you get us all together, it puts the puzzle pieces, it makes the picture.
Well, David, it's also affected... It's also what affects you affects your family, correct?
Oh, yes, certainly.
So if you would allow me just a moment,
Remember, not details. I don't.
I will not. Okay. I'm going to just say that, and you know who you are out there. I have family members and close loved ones. I just want them to be proud of me and to know that I'm not just some freak who killed his best friend or assassinated him. One of the reasons I came forward is I wanted to try to help them understand that you can't move past until you find the truth. And I had thought I had put all this behind me. I never knew how close to the Franklin Credit Union scandal I really, truly was. I never knew how close to death I really, truly was. If they wanted to, I'm sure they could have charged me and thrown me in jail and thrown away the key. Why? I'm sure that's just that same angel that was sitting on my shoulder that caused the bullet to exit through the top of his head instead of go straight through temple to temple. The bullet was never found as far as the report goes. But there was never a leak in our ceiling. Never. Not a wet spot, one. If a bullet had traveled through the ceiling and out the roof, there would have at least been some water damage over the next year or so. There was never any. But yet, no bullet either. That has caused me to struggle so much. It's
but think about it.
Things, but like I said, I want them to be proud of me, and I want them to know that I'm standing up and I'm speaking out. I'm not a coward. And I'm not a murderer, and I'm not an assassin.
I don't think anybody, Michael, believes that you are any of those things. You are an amazing individual and the reason why they never took you to court and charged you is because to do that would have made it public, and there would have been a public record. And they don't want a public record, and so they kept it quiet. You ended up going and living your life, and they spun the story however way they wanted. You know, that's what they do. They spin the story however way they want to end up making themselves look like the heroes and cover up all the crimes. And that's the reason why. But you had an angel on your shoulder, and like we've said, I really do believe that Sean Bonner saved your life, because I really do believe if that bullet would have gone the way it was supposed to go, it would have gone through Sean and right into you. You would have perished right along with it.
Yes, it would have. Or if he wouldn't have taken the gun, in my opinion, I believe it would have been so-called dry-fired again. And from the angle that the chair sits to the couch, I would have been right in the line also.
Well, you can't escape
both of us.
You can't escape the fact that he pulled that trigger 30 or 40 times at least that night playing with that gun. It never went off. Never. So how exactly does such a powerful bullet magically appear in the gun and then go off?
I guess I told myself for the longest time that maybe since he was feeling that Jolene was kind of onto him, he put a live one in there, and only he and Jolene knew that it was live. So Sean accidentally shot himself with an unloaded gun.
That would be all fine and good. But then when you look at the story of David Klotz, how closely it mirrors.
Oh, and the rest of the clear evidence
Well,
especially what happened with Troy.
And that's that's just it. There's too many coincidences. If it was one, that would be fine. But this is like a series. Because David, let me just quick explain the situation with David Klotz. David Klotz lived with a roommate. His roommate had just gotten a job at Wells Fargo as a security guy. And I never met Mark. I talked to him on the phone once. Long story, not going to go into it. But I believe, from what I know of the situation, is that Mark would have a tendency to just point, or Mike, his name was Mike, and he would just point the gun and shoot it because it was never loaded. And David and Mike were friends. Well, the day that David was shot, there was a guy there named Bill Dillon. Bill Dillon was supposedly my best friend and David Klotz's best friend. And Bill, I believe, put the bullet in the gun. So David was laughing at Mike, which was typical of David. He was always making fun of everybody and everything. I mean, he was just like that. And so Michael just raised up the gun like he always had, and the gun went off the second round and went into David's eye and blew out the back of his head.
And that's a semi-automatic.
Sounds like a horrible accident. Well, yeah. I came up because I was living in Florida at the time. My mom had sent me down to Florida. I was upset because I thought my mom was trying to be like this parental figure, and I didn't know her as a parental figure, so I was all upset. But I come to find out, now that I look back, my mom sent me to Florida because she knew what was going down. And she knew if I was in town, I'd be involved with it, and she wanted to save me. So she sent me down. So David was shot and killed when I was down in Florida. Came up 2 weeks later to say goodbye. Came up for a week to say goodbye. The very last day I'm supposed to leave the next day, Bill Dillon calls me and brings me to his house. Bill Dillon then hands me a white towel that is full of brain and bone and skull fragments that Bill scooped up off of the thing, or off of the floor. Put them in this towel, waited 2 weeks for me to get back there, waited the week just for me to get ready to leave, told me that he had a present for me from Alan Baer. And I hated Alan Baer. I told him, I don't want anything from Alan Baer. What do you have for me from Alan Baer? So he goes into his closet, pulls out this towel. So I get to this I open this towel, and it's just like, what is this? And Bill Dillon looks at me and says, this is exactly what's going to happen to you if you don't keep your mouth shut. And I got on the bus because I was taking a Greyhound bus getting back down to Florida. And basically from Omaha to Florida, I basically had a nervous breakdown, complete nervous breakdown. I mean, went back to Florida and started telling people I had $521 million frozen in a bank account of drug money. Because I was so desperate not to be me and not to be where I was in my life that I just came up with, didn't last long. It was, didn't last very long, about 6 months, but long enough to make my life a living hell and to make myself look like an idiot. But but don't be too hard on yourself there, brother. I have to say this though. That's why I now know why Troy in the video on tape says that Sean was them sending him a message. And that's why he believed that wholeheartedly. And that's what everyone...
similarities.
And Michael, that's what everyone knows. The people who have actually investigated Franklin, for the most part, everybody knows that Troy's brother was murdered to shut him up, but nobody until today knew any of the details. No one.
Thank you so much for letting me come forward and talk about this publicly.
Thank you. I mean, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of chutzpah, I guess you'd call it, to be able to come forward and talk about it in such a way that you have, and thank you so much for, letting people know. I know you're honored to be on my show, but let me assure you, the honor is completely and totally mine. You're
definitely welcome. I feel that, my daily Christian walk would be just a big joke if I didn't take the opportunity to tell my side of what happened that night and to at least share the pieces that I've put together. And since I've talked to you, since the first time I talked to you, I've been flooded with information that previously I was not privileged to.
And that's not information from me. It's just when
no, not at all.
This
is actually through my own research, but a lot of research. Again, I'm not going to name family members, but I thank them for providing me with that information. I thank the loved one out there, and she knows who she is, for telling me to be strong and do this, because there are kids that are still suffering this abuse. They're trafficking. They're being trafficked. And then most of those, as anyone knows, if they don't come forward and they don't get help and they don't have someone to at least talk to about it and get it off their chest, they too become abusers. And the older kids, like you and Troy, you end up in a position where, like Troy, hey buddy, no more heroin, no more apartment, no more money, unless you bring me a couple of fresh kids, like children or something to be bought at a wine shop, to be auctioned.
Well,
they're
Michael,
children,
it's what
they're people. They're human beings.
Michael, it's what we talked about. What people think about human trafficking, and they think about human traffickers, and they think about these weird old guys that you can just pick out. But let me tell everyone, if your child gets abducted, chances are the very first abductors that your child will meet are children, because they're using children to lure other children to be abducted and trafficked. My older siblings, I was never used at Boys Town like this, but it was because of I was too young, and then everything that happened with my parents making me light a guy on fire. They couldn't use me that way. But my older siblings, they were often taken to Boys Town and expected to pick up kids, boys, and then help get them abducted. They only have to lure the people over. They don't do the actual abductions. They're just the bait. And so when you think that your child, you're warning your children about, these creepy abductors, like you can tell who they are. You can't tell who they are because they're often kids. Just like Troy, they get them hooked on heroin. They give them an apartment. They give them a car. And then when they want what they want, they just threaten to take it all away. And they'll do just about anything. And
exactly.
The sad I was not a big fan of Troy Bonner, but that was as a kid. Now that I'm an adult and I know way more than what I used to, I just realized that Troy was just like all the rest of them. He was just caught up in something that was so big and so out of his league that there was no way at his young age that he could actually fight it. Now, Paul Bonacci's totally different. Paul Bonacci's fake. He's a shill. I never saw him. I never saw him at any of the parties. I've never met anybody in Omaha who even remembers him. And yet he's supposed to be like this instrumental person for Omaha. Well, how can he be this instrumental person if nobody ever met him before Alicia Owen?
Exactly.
Where did he come from?
Exactly. It's,
And let me remind everyone that Paul Bonacci, it was his dumb, idiotic, multiple personality act that if you go back and look at it and you know anything about multiple personality disorder, it is ridiculous. It is the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life. But he used that to make the grand jury come forward and say that everything that was being reported about Omaha was a carefully crafted hoax. And it all goes back to Paul Bonacci and all of his weird multiple personality change things. That movie with Edward Norton and Richard Gere, Primal Fear, they should have had, I think it was inspired. Edward Norton was inspired by Paul Bonacci because it's just about as dumb,
Yeah.
And
yeah. I know
Alicia
we've
Owen,
discussed.
and they think that Paul Bonacci was Alicia's hero. Alicia got set up, got locked away, and got forgotten about. Except now she's out. So now Noreen Gosh and Paul Bonacci and that whole group, now they're befriending her again. Well, of course they're befriending her again.
Yeah.
They certainly don't want her to talk.
And the DNA evidence I've found, I can't find any proof of a DNA test that Wadman, the chief of police of Omaha at the time, and the one she was accusing, if you go ahead and find any pictures, which they're out there, you can find them, like me, you will see the resemblance is uncanny.
Uncanny.
For someone who never had sex with Alicia Owen, her child sure looks a lot like him.
And let's remember, her child isn't much of a child anymore. And so you can look at her child and look at pictures of Robert Wadman and see the resemblance is undeniable.
It is undeniable.
It is totally undeniable. This thing was just basically, and again, they used most of the people that were enveloped in this were all young kids, heavy in the gay lifestyle, but really you didn't have to be gay to be involved with this. And you got involved with Sean Bonner because Troy Bonner was such an integral part of it. And
yeah, I just thought I'd met a really cool friend, and up until, like I said recently, I thought, it was another tragic accident, though, it was ruled an accident, but, deep in your heart sometimes how you think that you're over something, you think you've put something in your past, and I, again, have to, my friends, close friends, my circle, my loved ones have known me for so long, and they've always wondered why. Around children, I have always stressed the things that I have stressed. That, you do not ride with strangers, do not talk with strangers, do not just trust someone because they say something. I've known this anyway just because, and this is coincidentally, I guess, but maybe something that's been in the back of my mind, okay, because of Troy. But I have, in the stories that I've been told, I have stressed to them, and I have stressed to parents, do not let your kids just go. Don't. And, of course, the question has come up, and, how strict I am. Let me put it that way. And, why babysitters aren't called. and why no, you can't stay the night.
People who go through the kind of trauma that you have, or like I have, you become hypersensitive. And hypersensitivity is not a bad thing sometimes.
Yeah, but I hope they don't, I hope they understand now that I wasn't just trying to be a jerk. I wasn't just trying to be overprotective. I wasn't just trying to coddle, or that I was somehow maniacal, because I'm still so hypersensitive around children that, I mean, gosh, just even a diaper rash is something huge to me. And I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Why is there a rash there? What's going on? Do you need some money for diapers? Just ask. I mean, what's the deal? Simple things like that. I'm obsessive about it. And I think I'm going to remain that way. I don't feel that the Spirit is leading me to do anything but stay that way, and trying to share with other people that stop taking things for granted. And these are our children. These are our children's children. Come on now, people. They're children. If you don't teach them, and I don't want to overstep my bounds here. I know that this isn't a Christian show, David, but I want to say this as the clock is running.
Have no fear. Say what you'd like.
Do not ever think that leaving Jesus Christ out of your life and your children, teaching them about Christ, is a good thing. Don't you dare. Don't you dare. If you look at the United States today, every time God has been removed, look at what has happened. From Columbine down the line, every single time the enemy is winning, or it seems. But those of us with faith, we know in the end, it's already been won for us.
And that's what I think, is that it has been won. We're already, the victory has already been had.
That's right.
It's just that we're starting to get, it's just taking us a bit of time to catch up to speed.
Exactly.
And,
Exactly. That's well said.
I know that I know that there are people out there who are going to be irked by this, but this is my first show. And so I really need to set a precedent for my first show. And the precedent, I talked to Michael about it. Now, we didn't get a chance to do the beginning because we were 10 minutes late because of me. My computer rebooted, and I was having technical difficulties. It was me. But I had talked to Michael about opening and closing with prayer. Now, we still have about 8 minutes left, so we're not going to do it right now. But for those of you who become upset or incensed or put off by prayer and thanking heaven for everything that heaven has done for us, and thanking heaven for bringing the light and giving us strength and showing us the way and giving us guidance and helping us to become stronger, more compassionate people, I think you should probably skip the last 5 minutes, because I am warning you now. I've asked Michael. He's agreed. But at the very end of this, we are going to close with prayer. No, I am not a Christian per se. You read my book, you will find that I am a practicing shaman. But I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever the validity of the teachings of Jesus Christ. I find them flawless. You can't argue with them. You can give all the opinions you want, but I've never been able to hear one person argue the Bible. Yes. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and everything that Jesus Christ said. Absolutely not. It's the way. Love is the way. It is a commandment, not a suggestion. And eventually I will have a show where I will go further into this, either on my own radio station or on another interview that I'm on. And I will talk about this. But if you have an objective to loving God, loving everyone around you, if you have an objection, take it, tie it around your neck, and go throw yourself in the ocean, because that's the best advice I can give you.
Yeah,
because I really...
I agree completely. I don't want to offend. I don't want to offend people. I don't want to chase them away. I'm not going to paint this picture that the daily Christian walk and a relationship, a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, is a picnic. It's not easy. It's not something that's
you could
simple.
Say that again.
It's not something that's simple. I know that there are a lot of your listeners that probably aren't Christians, and I'm okay with that, but I don't want to chase you away either. I don't want to get away from the issue, but I want you to understand that evil is evil. Evil is evil.
Michael, you don't have to be a Christian to be in love. You can be a Jew, a Muslim, a Buddhist.
Exactly.
Anyone can believe in love. There is no religion that's connected and has the monopoly on love. And
exactly. There you go.
The two commandments Jesus Christ gave us. Love God, love everyone else. If you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong. You know? And on that note, we're coming up. I have 3:57. So we have probably about 4 minutes left. And so I'm going to let you finish. Just give us your thoughts. And then if you would, lead us into some prayer, or lead us into a short prayer. Michael, I just want to tell you again, thank you. And I am truly honored that you gave me this opportunity to let people hear your side of the story, you know.
Again, I thank you, David, because the opportunity, I haven't had an opportunity yet. Of course, like I said, friends, family, that, I tell them about it, and I try to keep it short and sweet, and because I've tried to keep it behind me, that I think now I'm realizing that there's just a bigger scope. And for me, it only confirms my faith. Now, for others, they may say, "Oh, well, that's just human nature," or "That's just how it goes." But
okay, Michael, I got to interrupt you. We need a prayer. We need a prayer.
No, here it is. All righty. Heavenly Father, we come to you today, and we ask that you protect our children. Lord, I just ask that your hand be with David as he tries to spread the truth. He tries to open people's eyes to a different perspective, to help them understand why these terrible things are happening and who's behind them. Who's truly behind them? I know that if people don't believe in you, how can they believe in your greatest adversary and only adversary? Lord, I just ask that today, you be with David and you help lead me and all the other adults and children who have suffered at the hands of senseless abuses like this. That you just be with us and let the Spirit flow through us. Give us calm, give us peace, and let us live that life that you intended for us. Let us live for you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Michael. Please join me next Sunday for a next recording of davidschurter.com on Awake Radio. And that wraps it up for tonight. So thank you so much for listening, and be sure to tune in next week. And the guest will be announced later on. So thank you. Check out my blog, davidschurter.com. Thank you, and have a great evening.